A little bit about me before we start. So I am a registered nutritional therapist and nutritionist. I've been in practice over 15 years. I'm based down in the southeast in Norfolk. I work mostly a lot in one-to-one clinics, so I support families around the UK and around the world with nutrition. But a big part of my work is also teaching and training. I train early years practitioners and wraparound staff all around the UK. I have a huge passion for nutrition. I have a huge passion for keeping nutrition simple because I think it can get really complex. One of my specialist areas is neurodivergence and restrictive eating. It's an area I'm really passionate about as well. And I truly believe that our food system is a little bit broken, as you've probably seen. And what I think is it's really important not to food shame. I really want to get that across. I'm not here to say we mustn't do this and we mustn't do that. I'm here to support you. And I think I would really recommend that you take that approach in the families that you work with. What can we add in? This is the big part that I kind of recommends that we look at with nutrition. We hear so much about what we shouldn't eat, but actually what I think we should really get across, not only to the young people and children that we work with, but also to the families that we engage with and other professionals that we engage with, is what can we add to provide more nutrition, more nourishment. And it's about adding that good stuff in rather than what we should take away. I'm also an author. That's my book at the top there, Racing the Rainbow, which I specifically wrote and was illustrated by a friend of mine, just to give some ideas around supporting the gut microbiome and eating a rainbow, which is a really nice concept, which I'll talk a little bit about today when covering nutrition. So really, I think people don't often realize, but when you're working with children, any positive steps that you can make with nutrition, what you're really doing is helping to support a lifetime of good health. The changes that you make now, the nutritional support that you help the families with, that you work with, actually can have a really profound impact on their health as an adult, even right into their senior years. Actually dementia prevention starts in our 20s and 30s, and actually eating a healthy diet, a healthier diet, the foundations of that start from such a young age. So, you can have such an impact, not only in terms of brain development, but also in terms of physical health and prevention of serious disease. That age-old saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Obviously, it's not that simple, but, we can really help to support our health and well-being long-term through the foods that we eat on a day-to-day basis. And it's not about having a perfect diet. It's not about taking all those foods away that give us joy. Sometimes we just need to eat foods because they're joyful. That's absolutely fine. You will find in nutrition that you do get some pushback sometimes from families and carers, but the difference is it's about not saying we're never having chocolate, but it's about, trying to have that knowledge and understanding that we don't need chocolate in a lunchbox, right? It's about finding that balance because life is all about balance. So tonight we're going to cover, why does good nutrition matter? So we'll look about the why. Why have the Department of Health brought in those new early years guidelines? We'll be really looking at why nutrition can help support the building blocks of a healthy life, prevention of illness, brain development, that gut-brain axis. Balanced nutrition can help support balanced behaviour, and we'll touch on a little bit about the problem with UPFs. It's a big part of the early years guidelines, isn't it? Cooking from scratch, where you do provide food. I know not all of you will be providing food, but some of you will, trying to cook from scratch, obviously, as much as you possibly can. And we're going to focus tonight on macronutrients. So we're going to think about the macronutrients to combine for behaviour balance and learning, focus more on fibre and how to provide the right fats. And we'll be referring to the early years nutrition guidelines as part of this as well. And just to say, my training does really align with those guidelines that came in September 2025. I think there are parts of the guidelines guidelines that don't go far enough. But if you've got any questions about what I say and how that relates to the guidelines, obviously please do ask me. My aim is to talk for about an hour, and then we'll do Q&A, but please feel free to pop any questions that you have in the chat box, and if there are relevant, Fliss or Katie might pick those up and ask at the relevant time, or we can leave those to the end. So obviously, just as a reminder that every body and every brain is biologically unique. So obviously, please do listen to medical advice that is given. Tonight, I'm giving you general nutrition guidance, but every single child is unique. You might have, for example, very restrictive eaters in your care, and you know, they might have, for example, even if you have children with ARFID, for example, which is very restrictive food intake disorder. Of course, you've got to keep them eating their acceptable foods. You know, if you have children with specific medical conditions that they might not be able to eat certain foods, it's really important that you take a case-by-case basis, of course. So the previous nutrition guidelines, all we kind of were really given, wasn't it, were where children are provided with meals, snacks and drinks, they must be healthy, balanced and nutritious. What we're obviously seeing now is this much more detailed guidance, which I think is really, really good. I understand some of the limitations of it, how challenging it can be when you send children up to primary school and it's not quite the same, as it is not quite so all-encompassing in primary school. Perhaps, you know, there's a real divide there, but generally from September 2025, the guidelines say we intend to include a new requirement in the safeguarding and welfare requirements of the earliest foundation stage that providers should have regard to this nutrition guidance, follow it unless there is good reason not to. And that good reason might be some of the things I mentioned: medical requirements, allergies, children with very restrictive eating patterns, which it does make note to in the guidance, and really important, as I said, that we just follow this as much as we possibly can. So let's really look at, why does good nutrition matter? What is the why here? And I think the information I'm going to give you now will really help you to understand why those guidelines have been changed, why nutrition is really important. And this information will help you when you're communicating with grown-ups, carers, parents, and in how you communicate with children. Obviously, it will be different in how you communicate with children, but you know, this is really, really vital key information. Some of it you might know, some of it might be new to you, but you know, really understanding the why, I think, is really key. So, you know, on a basic level, nutrition is really important for providing sufficient energy and nutrients for the body to function optimally, not just prevent illness. We want to function at our best, to truly thrive, to grow in a healthy way, to build, so you know, things from bones to your hair to your muscles, and repair, you know, that immune system, and being able to repair from injury and illness is really, really important. And to give the best protection against the risk of future disease and maintenance of a healthy weight and reduce the risk of obesity. Of course, you know, I was talking to another health professional today. So much of what we see in the medical literature about children's health focuses so much on obesity, doesn't it? And prevention of obesity. But, you know, health and thriving is so much more than that. And you know, it's my professional opinion that we should be going beyond weight. You know, that's just a tiny part of the picture, one of the least, you know, important in a way. And actually, we should be looking at, you know, our nutrient status. Nutrition is far more important, and it's much more than just getting calories in. And nutrition really is about reducing the risk of and impact of malnourishment. And a really important point on there, you can be in the medically obese category and be malnourished. So you can be what's classically described in medical terms as overweight and have malnourishment. Why? Because you are deficient in key nutrients that support your health and wellness. And also, we tend to think often, don't we, about nutrition in terms of our physical health, but think about our brain health, the way we think, our behavior, our mood, our ability to sleep. You know, actually, nutrition plays a really big role in those as well. And, you know, nutrition, we really want to be thinking about closing the nutrition gap. So we want to be supporting each and every child's ability to achieve and be their best. And that's especially vital for children who may not have access to healthy foods at home, of course. when we're thinking about closing the nutrition gap, actually really thinking about nutrition in terms of those periods of rapid growth. Children really do need to eat the right balance of nutrients and energy, and early intervention is really crucial, because lack of nutrition at critical periods in life can lead to irreversible changes in development, including brain development. Here's one study. In conclusion, dietary patterns in early and mid-childhood are associated with differences in brain morphology. That's the structure, the size, the function of the brain. So really, really important. And what we see is that children in the most economically deprived households are 2 times as likely to have obesity compared to those in the least deprived, which goes against perhaps what you might think in terms of food scarcity. Actually, it's that reliance on ultra processed foods that we see in higher levels in economically deprived families versus those who are not so economically deprived. So we see higher levels of obesity in the most deprived areas. Children in the most deprived groups are actually more likely to have short stature, and we see the highest rates of the less healthy ultra processed foods, because not all ultra processed foods are terrible. There's kind of a bit of a spectrum, and we see those less healthy ones in the lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And that's why it's really important not to food shame. Really focusing, as I said earlier, on what can we do, what can we add in, what are the good stuff that we can replace. And as I said, you don't have to have a lower BMI to be malnourished. You can be obese, and I use that term medically rather than in a, it's such a loaded word, obese and obesity, isn't it? But I'm just using the medical term here. We can be medically obese and still be malnourished due to deficiencies in essential vitamins and minerals like iron, like calcium, like zinc, like fibre, for example. And early years are a really, really key time for nutritional programming. So eating patterns are established in the first few years of life. It's those foundations of taste preferences, future eating habits. Babies are born with a naturally sweet tooth because breast milk is quite sweet, isn't it? And actually, they naturally have an aversion to bitter foods because ancestrally and historically, when babies were born, it's actually bitter. And when they go through that kind of weaning journey, it's bitter foods that tend to be foods that are off or might be harmful, or there's lots of kind of poisonous plants, aren't there, that are more bitter in flavour. So it's a natural survival instinct that babies do have a natural aversion to bitter foods, which is why we need to get those more bitter flavours like your broccoli in at an early age, so that children then learn to accept those flavours. There is a natural disgust response. For some children, it's much more heightened. And in those with restrictive eating, it is thought that the disgust response doesn't switch off. And so it's really important to expose children to those early flavours, different types of foods from an early age. Children eating more ultra-processed foods at the age of 2 are much more likely to be higher consumers of them at the age of 7. Children and adolescents who are overweight are up to 5 times more likely to have weight issues as an adult. So we're kind of seeing that metabolic programming in an early age. And poor nutrition in early life not only increases risk of obesity, but also high blood pressure and heart disease, type 2 diabetes as adults. And even as teenagers, we do see those conditions like high blood pressure and type 2 diabetes in teenagers as well. Poor diet is linked to 4 times the risk of ADHD. Now, that's not to say that poor diet causes ADHD, but it can exacerbate a genetic tendency towards it. So if those risk factors are already there, poor diet is not potentially going to be helpful. But of course, that can be challenging with ADHD, can't it? And other neurodiversities like autism, because you tend to see more sensory eating challenges. Low fruit and veg intake is linked to increased risk of mental health challenges. A poor diet can impact our ability to learn and even our IQ. And high intake of ultra-processed foods associated with increased risk of anxiety and depression. So we're seeing that research is there, but it's not new news. Even studies going back to the early noughties, even back into the 90s, we see links with what was then called junk food. We tend to call it ultra-processed food now in early childhood, being linked to hyperactivity. Dietary patterns in early childhood impact neurological development by 8 years of age. So what a child eats at age 6 months, 15 and 24 months associated with IQ at 8 years of age. So you can see how nutrition can have such a role on healthy brain development, healthy physical development. The brain is a really, really hungry organ. It accounts for just 2% of our body weight, but it takes 20% of our energy from food. And not only just our energy, but also a big part of our nutritional intake as well. Just have a think for a moment. You know, everything that you are, you know, your hair, your skull, your skin, you know, your heart and how it beats, even your thoughts and your emotions really are impacted by the food that you eat. Often food just becomes this kind of daily habit, this daily ritual that we have to do, but we so often forget, don't we, in the kind of, you know, autonomic quality, that kind of automatic, you know, quality sometimes in our lives, you know, as we're just kind of moving through our lives, how much food has such an important role in how we are physically, physiologically, and mentally. Let's not forget oral health in young children as well. Early years are a vital time for tooth development and prevention of decay, of course, but we're seeing 1 in 4 children starting primary have evidence of tooth decay, and that is double in the most deprived children. We're seeing that often in minimum 3 teeth in children starting primary school, and the leading cause of hospital admissions in 5 to 9-year-olds in the UK is tooth extraction. Yeah, it's not serious illness, it's tooth extraction. And a lot of that will be coming from, you know, poor nutrition. There are also established links with oral microbiome. So that's the collections of bacteria in our gut and other diseases, including cardiovascular and heart disease, for example. So we're really seeing that loss of traditional diets. We're moving to higher sugar and unhealthy fats, low in fiber, low in micronutrients diets. You know, again, I don't want to overfocus on weight as a marker of health, but, you know, this is some of the statistics that the government will quote. 1 in 5 children starting school are overweight or obese. Fruit and veg intake in the UK is at an all-time low, and over 50% of the UK diet is from ultra-processed foods. It's even higher in our early years. It's actually over 60% in early years. In preschool children, and it is one of the worst rates in the world. We are on a par with the United States. Canada is just behind us, and Australia is just behind that. So we have one of the highest ultra-processed food intakes in the world. Sugar intake of children on average is still double the recommended, despite the move with the sugar tax. We're seeing 88% of 1.5 to 3-year-olds don't meet fibre targets. Fibre is so vital, has been linked to prevention of things like colon cancer later in life, type 2 diabetes, metabolic issues, cardiovascular issues. More than 10% of preschoolers are at risk of iron deficiency. 1 in 5 children age 4 have insufficient zinc intake. 10% of children don't get enough vitamin A. And that's not just in the socioeconomically deprived children, that is across the board as well. You know, why is that? I mean, it's a really interesting debate and something perhaps we can dive into at another time, but, you know, families are time poor, they don't have enough knowledge. We'll talk a little bit about ultra-processed foods and, you know, children's foods that purport to be healthy, really not being healthy. We've seen this intake of ultra-processed food steadily increase over the past 2 decades. And that's not to say, look, it's not to say I never eat ultra-processed foods. Might I just say, it's just about how much of our diet has become ultra-processed foods. A 2023 study found that over 65% of preschoolers' diets, as I said, in the UK is highly processed. So that's associated with low fibre, low protein, low potassium, zinc, magnesium, various vitamins, high in emulsifiers, packaging contaminants, and non-sugar sweeteners. Just because something says it's low sugar, that doesn't mean it doesn't have sweeteners in it, right? And we shouldn't be giving sweeteners to young children, absolutely not. This was a study in the British Medical Journal from 2024. This is one of the first studies actually that was not funded by a big food manufacturing company. They found that greater exposure to ultra-processed food was linked to 50% higher risk of heart disease related death. I find the third one there really interesting, 48 to 53% higher risk of anxiety and depression. So real links with mental health. And, you know, we're hearing more and more about children and young people developing more mental health concerns. Even what we're seeing is a new study from 2024 last year, changing our bone structure. Recent research suggests UPFs may have a negative impact on jaw development. That's due to the hyperpalatability of ultra-processed foods. We don't have to chew them very much, do we? How many children are you seeing coming into your care that 10 years ago would have been really having a lot of speech, that speech being delayed, for example? When we chew proper foods, something like learning to chew meat, or kind of crunching on vegetables, raw vegetables, that actually helps with our jaw development, which is so important for developing our ability to speak. And you can understand why maybe a 3 or 4 year old who hasn't been properly weaned and hasn't been put on foods that requires chewing, might potentially be quite frightened of foods that require a lot of chewing, because they've never just never been exposed to them. So of course, an ultra-processed food is a food you couldn't recreate in your kitchen. It's been industrially processed, a lot of ingredients that you don't recognise or couldn't purchase yourself. So artificial flavours, emulsifiers, colourings, sweeteners, preservatives. And that includes many baby foods and includes many health foods. If something has a health claim on the front, like a good source of calcium, that doesn't tell you what else is in that food. It doesn't tell you that it's got lots of sugar, sweeteners, emulsifiers, colorings, and things like that. So be really careful of health claims. And actually, one study, this was a really good report by the Food Foundation that came out this year. Foods aimed at children, 41% of foods aimed at children that claim to be healthy are in fact unhealthy. 51% of foods featuring cartoons are unhealthy. You can see why parents get it wrong. You can see why we get it wrong. We're all busy people, aren't we? And we pick up these things, thinking that they're going to be healthy. We think that there's going to be strict legislation against, how we market to under 4-year-olds, right? So it's a really, really challenging area. And this is despite public health recommendations to avoid added sugar and salt in the diets of young children. Let's have a look at something like dairy lunches. I bet some of you see some of these in lunch boxes. They're clearly marketed at children. They have a health claim, well, 2 on there, a source of protein, a good source of calcium. They also say stack, snack, satisfy. I don't know if I would be satisfied with cheese food. They can't even call it cheese. Look, they call it cheese food slices. It says it's got added vitamin D, so you would think that that would be healthy. But actually, when you look at the ingredients, what should cheese be made of? Milk. That is it. Maybe a bit of salt, maybe a bit of cultures, bacterial cultures. But look, this is a food marketed at children. It's called cheese food because it's not enough cheese to call it cheese. It's got, lots of things in there are fine, but if you start to get down to line 3, you're going to see things like preservatives, acidity regulators, and then in wheat crackers, you've got as the third ingredient is sugar, 5th ingredient is glucose fructose syrup, which has been linked to increased risk of type 2 diabetes, for example. You've got sulfites in there. You've got a lot of things in there that we don't really want, young children to be eating. And that's the problem. We're really not closing the nutrition gap with ultra-processed foods. Those foods might impact sleep, drive hunger and addiction, might disrupt blood sugar, stripped of fibre and other key nutrients. But I bet you're seeing a lot of them in lunch boxes, even these kind of things here, which a lot of us probably ourselves gave to our children when they were younger. Do children actually recognise fruit and vegetables as fruit and vegetables, or do they think it's kind of a melty puff as a carrot? These things at the bottom here, these kind of melty puffs, I mean, they're effectively just what's it? It is a crisp. It's nothing more than that, even though it tries to make out that it's, a carrot stick. Just to give you a couple of examples here, melty carrot puffs. Yes, they're organic, but should we be marketing crisps to 6 months old? Yeah. There's been quite a lot of coverage on pre-made foods as well. If you want to find out more, there was a really good Panorama documentary on the BBC all about the sucky pouches and how there's a real concern that they're not great for tooth development. Also not great for chewing either. So, really simple things is they should just just be really squeezed onto a spoon. That is how they were intended. And often they're very, very high in sugar, not because they've got added sugar in them, but because they're so high in fruits. I'll give you an example. Ella's Kitchen. I mean, I use these for my children. My children are late teens now, because, you know, you trust them. At the time I was training in nutrition, you know, and it is just blueberries, apples and bananas and vanilla in that pouch, but actually it's got the equivalent of 3.5 teaspoons of sugar, and that's being marketed at a 4-month-old baby. What's going to happen with that is that baby is going to develop more of a like for sweet flavors, not developing that bitter taste. And that is a lot of sugar. Even though it's fruit sugar, it's a lot of sugar in one hit to be given to, let alone a 4-month-old. And there's a lot of call about, you know, weaning products being labeled as 6-month-old plus, because that's generally when we should be weaning. Things like these strawberry fruit wiggles. Please try to educate the parents that you work with that that's not fruit. I know it says it's packed with real fruit, but that isn't actually got a lot of goodness in there. And actually, if you look per 12-gram bags, that's 8 grams of sugar. A really nice way to show parents about these things is to give them pictures and show them equivalent of teaspoons. I even saw a really nice thing at the dentist a while ago where they had different foods actually pinned to a board, and they had sacks of sugar hanging underneath to show how much sugar was in those foods. So not a lot of nutrition in there. Same with these kind of, you know, fruity bakes, encourages self-feeding. They've got these kind of, you know, positive messages on, but each bar has got 7.7 grams of sugar, which is about 1.5 teaspoons of sugar in there. I think the thing is, it's not to say, you know, that we should never have a treat, a cake, that kind of thing. But it actually, you know, we've kind of got out of this tradition, haven't we, of kind of baking from scratch and relying more on these kind of processed and packaged foods. It's great to get children into the kitchen and learn to bake and learn to cook other things rather than these kind of, you know, packaged foods. So big push in the early years nutrition guidelines to be trying to get children to include plenty of vegetables and fruit, of course, and unprocessed foods. And a really big part of that is because that's really important for our gut microbiome. So I just want to touch on the gut microbiome because it's really key knowledge. And I think we hear so much about bacteria being bad for us, don't we? That's one of the reasons I wrote the book that I wrote, because I think there's so much about, you know, bacteria is bad for us. But I think it's really important to learn that bacteria can be our friend. The right bacteria can be our friend. So in our digestive system, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, we have trillions and trillions of organisms, mostly bacteria. In fact, this collection of bacteria, fungi and yeast are called a microbiome. And we have those microbiomes all around our body. We have them on our skin. In females, there's a vaginal microbiome, there's an oral microbiome, there's even a placenta microbiome. The gut microbiome is the biggest collection of organisms. They're mostly in the large intestine, and they're really, really important for our health. We are more bacteria than we are human cells. 90% of the cells in the human body are actually not human. We have about 4 pounds of organisms in our digestive tract. And these trillions of organisms can influence our brain and behavior. They alter our nervous system function. They speak to our brain. So you might have heard of the second brain in the gut, or the gut-brain axis. Really important when we're talking about neurological development. And they can even push us to crave certain foods. Other jobs that they have is they actually make vitamins. They help us digest and absorb our food. A big part of our immune system and our immune programming comes from the gut microbiome. They help with bowel movements, support our brain, balance our immune system, and they make a lot of our neurotransmitters. So 95% of our serotonin is made in our gut. Thank you to our gut microbiome. And they really help to keep that gut lining, which is a bit like an internal skin, happy and healthy. So they're providing that barrier to the inside, only helping to allow vitamins and minerals and water and macronutrients like, you know, broken down carbohydrate molecules and things like that, and amino acids get in, and stopping anything else from getting in, like unwanted bacteria, viruses, and any unwanted things that are in our food, toxins and that kind of thing. So some really nice books actually about the bacteria in our belly, which you might want to incorporate into your practice. Gut Garden, A Garden in Your Belly, Rating the Rainbow. There's some really, really nice books there that you might find helpful. Let's just zoom in a moment on the gut-brain connection, because a healthier gut is a healthier brain. How many children do you see with constipation? How many children do you see with loose bowels, diarrhea, explosive type diarrhea? We're seeing more and more gut problems in young children, and that can link to an imbalance in the gut microbiome, which can impact our neurological development as well, and also have an impact on our mental health and our executive function and cognition, so anxiety, mood and depression. There was a study done of 9,000 Norfolk school children a few years ago, and they found that links with fruit and veg were linked to better mental health, and they were looking at why this might be, and a lot of the discussion around that is to do with the links with eating more vegetables and fruit and the links with a healthier gut microbiome. I'm just going to flick forward through that bit, but the problem is fruit and veg intake in the under fives is very low. It's even lower in primary school children and secondary school children. Under fives on average consume about 1.5 portions of veg a day and 2 to 2.5 portions of fruit a day. So it's on average about 3 to 4.5 a day, but there are significant differences between income groups. The early years foundation stage guidance recommends providing at least 1 portion of vegetables and or fruit at each main meal and as part of snacks, not dried fruit as part of snacks. That does count towards 5 a day, but to include that with meals so that it doesn't affect oral health. So if you're thinking that, you know, that's the average, about 3.5 a day, and we should be hitting 5 a day, there are a lot of children that are eating a lot less. It's about 20 to 30% of secondary school children are not even getting 1 a day. And one of the things I really want to emphasize is every increase that you make in fruit and vegetable intake, not only for yourself, but you know, your families and the people that you work with, for every person, every incremental increase in their veg and fruit intake will have a positive impact on their health. So what that means is sometimes the idea of 5 a day, and actually 5 a day is a minimum, not a target, it can feel like so far off, particularly for some families, particularly for some families who are really struggling with food insecurity. But just encouraging them to understand, and for yourselves to understand within your practice, that, you know, even if you could increase the veg and fruit intake of the families that you work with by 1 a day, that absolutely is worth doing, even if you're a long way from 5 a day. Even if you could really focus on, can we get everybody eating a portion of fruit at breakfast? Can we get everybody eating an extra portion of vegetables with lunch? It is worth doing, because every incremental rise in veg and fruit intake, research demonstrates that has a positive impact on our health. So it's not an all or nothing situation. It's not we have to be at 5 a day to have a positive benefit. It's each incremental rise. So I think it's really good to understand that, and I think it's really good to tell families about that as well. A big part of this microbiome programming comes from the concept of the first 1,000 days, which you might have heard of. So that's the first 1,000 days from conception to around approximately age 2. And nutrition plays a really big role in this too, because we have a real huge programming during this time of our future health and how we grow in development. And the gut microbiome is a really important part of this, because we see a lot of assembly and maturation of the gut microbiome by around about age 2 or 3. That doesn't mean it's completely fixed and can't be changed, and diet can have a really big role to play. By the way, when I say diet, I don't mean going on a diet. That has been misused, that word. The word diet actually means how we eat. So when I say diet, I don't mean going on a diet. So our diet plays a really big role in our gut microbiome, and we can change it at a later date, but we see a real kind of, you know, setting down of our gut microbiome in those first couple of years of life. So that's why weaning plays such an important role, and during that time when that gut microbiome settles, the immune system is trained. We are learning, our gut microbiome is learning how we obtain energy and nutrients from food. It can help support the synthesis of vitamins, hormone regulation, providing that physical barrier, of course. And there's many factors that influence our gut microbiome. There's just a few there that you might want to have a look at. And during weaning, there's this rapid surge in different microorganisms as you start to introduce lots of different foods, which is why we don't just want those beige foods coming in, those pappy, hyperpalatable beige foods. The more diversity we can get in with our diet, the more we can get diversity in our gut microbiome. And a healthy gut microbiome is a diverse microbiome. I like to think of it like garden, and that's a nice way to talk about families, to talk about the gut microbiome to families and to even your kind of preschool children, because you can think of it like a garden, right? And here's a beautiful garden, you've got lots of different flowers. If we eat lots of different food, we're going to nourish lots of different flowers. If we only eat a few foods and same color foods, we're not going to get diversity in that gut microbiome garden. It's about eating a rainbow. I imagine you don't see too many lunch boxes that look like this, but trying to get a little bit more diversity in there. This obviously would be suitable for an older child, but you know, this is actually one of the salads I make for my family. It's just about trying to get that color, trying to get that diversity, trying to get in this concept of eating a rainbow from a young age. So foods for a healthy gut microbiome, you'll see a lot of these are mentioned in the early years nutrition guidance. So things like getting a variety of vegetables and fruits, trying to eat all the rainbow. One of the things I think is really lacking, particularly on primary school menus, is it's often broccoli and peas, broccoli and carrot, broccoli and sweet corn. There isn't a lot of diversity in there. Now, I understand that's a hard transition because you've got to get those children to eat it, right? And if children have never eaten those things, sometimes they are frightened of those things, but we have to come to a place where we start promoting diversity, yeah? Really, if you're cooking, like if you're on a nursery team or if you're a childminder making meals in-house, trying to get, you know, that base for all your sauces and stews to be things like onions, garlic, leeks and celery. It's a great way to add extra ones in, and you can chop those up. If you're time poor, you can chop those up and freeze them in little portions just so you can easily throw those into meals. Fresh herbs and spices, dried herbs and spices also really help to feed a healthy gut microbiome. Any plants are going to help to feed a diverse gut microbiome. And it's really good to get children used to those flavors from a young age. And it embraces obviously lots of different cultural heritages with food as well, trying to, you know, try lots of different dishes with different varieties of herbs and spices, nuts and seeds, beans and pulses, whole grains. So trying to move to higher whole grain foods for some of our foods, even from an early age. It's a new thing in the early years nutrition guidelines. We know that children do not eat enough fiber. Preschoolers, up to 88% of preschoolers are not eating enough fiber, and that's a real shift, you know, and a really important one in the guidelines, that we're not necessarily just giving white carbohydrates to younger children. They need a mixture of white and whole grains, and gradually transitioning onto more whole grains. Olive oil is a good source of polyphenols, which help to feed the gut microbiome. Cocoa powder, natural yogurt, maybe some kefir if you felt so inclined, which is highly fermented yogurt. All of these help to feed a healthy gut microbiome, those last two, because they've got beneficial bacteria in there. This is one of the charts that I use actually with children and families, going to suit your preschoolers rather than your kind of very early weaners, but trying to encourage children, perhaps in your setting or at home, might be a challenge they do with their families. They're trying to eat every colour of the rainbow every single day, trying to introduce some new colours. Perhaps that's something you introduce at snack time. Or if you don't prepare a lot of food in your setting, maybe you might do some food activities, perhaps on a Friday, where you bring in some different vegetables and fruit. I always say to practitioners, just emphasise to children, they don't have to try it, they don't have to like it, but we use all our senses with food. So what does it smell like? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like when you're touching it? It doesn't have to be all about taste, and they might then try and taste it if they felt so inclined, and they don't have to like it either. Sometimes things are useful, helpful foods that we don't necessarily always have to like. Another really important factor for the gut microbiome is getting exposed to the dirt, to soil, being outside, being in the forest, being in nature, has been really shown to support a healthier, more robust gut microbiome. And even one study, they found not only improvements in the gut microbiome, but also they found that it helped to reduce overall perceived stress, particularly anger frequency among preschool children. So they found that correlated with changes in certain gut microbiome, certain species correlated with positive changes to mental health. So yeah, lots to think about there, isn't there? I hope you know, everybody's keeping up. I don't know if there's been any questions that have come in if you want to take a pause, but I'm really happy to carry on for another 20 minutes and then we can take a Q&A at the end. Just going to take a sip of my tea just to get my throat back in lovely talking order.
There's no questions, Catherine, so you unless anybody's got any questions that they want to ask now while you're having a little sip. I don't think so. I'm processing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of information to process. I know. I try and give you a lot of information in these settings, in these webinars. I think also it's a little bit of slightly jaw-dropping sometimes when you hear the actually the reality behind our food system and what needs to change, and a lot of things that you probably somehow knew but maybe hadn't really seen in black and white. It's quite shocking, isn't it, the state that our food system is in. And I know it makes your jobs really hard. I do get that. You know, I'm not coming here and saying, you know, that you guys are doing anything wrong. I think it's great that you're here. And I think, you know, this is such a positive step that you're here. You're not going to be able to do all of it, and your families are not going to be able to do all of it. So pick some things that really resonate with you and your families and start there. But, you know, knowledge is power, I think. What can we do against these massive ultra-processed food companies? We can vote with our wallet, right? And as individuals, that's what we can do. I know it's hard sometimes. We're time poor, you know, and sometimes healthier foods are more expensive, aren't they? But sometimes packaged foods are more expensive too. So it's just, you know, getting some understanding, and that will help you in the way that you communicate with your families that you work with as well. So I have here this meal plate. It's slightly different to the Eat Well plate that you might have seen before, but I want to just zoom in on macronutrient balance now. Macronutrients, macro means big, they're the big nutrients. That's your proteins, your fats, your carbohydrates, and your fiber. Fiber kind of comes under that carbohydrate bracket. A lot of people ask me, like, how much does a, you know, average 2-year-old need in terms of food? The reality is there is no average 2-year-old size, is there? You know, you can have sometimes a foot between them, right? So a really nice way to think about portion sizes is to think about fist of the hand, right? So that's about a 2-year-old's fist, not my fist size, obviously. A 2-year-old's clenched fist volume is about how much protein they would need at a main meal, about the same for carbohydrates, and then a couple of portions of vegetables or salad or a little bit of fruit at breakfast or after a meal. And then you want to also include some healthy fats as part of that as well. A lot of people are quite worried about healthy fats because we hear so much about bad fat, but it's about actually getting the balanced fats. If we have time today, we'll cover healthy fats. If not, I'll move them over to our session in a couple of weeks. So one of the reasons that macronutrient balance is really important, I want to really give you a little bit of an overview of a technique that is really helpful with nutrition to help support balanced behavior. It will really help to support your own energy stability, your own management and resilience of stress as well. So this is relevant not just for children, but also for you guys as well. So what we really want to be helping to support is a balanced blood sugar control, glycemic control, and that really correlates with balanced behavior. Children with ADHD, as an example, often have a really disrupted glycemic control. They're not so good at balancing their blood sugar, and they're much more likely to have sugar swings from sugary foods. So a small amount of sugar for an ADHD is much more likely to cause big swings of blood sugar, which is going to cause and contribute to that emotional dysregulation. But for all children and all humans, keeping your blood sugar levels more balanced can be a really, really profound shift in the way that you feel on a day-to-day basis. So our blood sugar naturally swings up and down throughout the day as we eat. So in that first curve there, as we eat a meal, our blood sugar will naturally go up. Everything that you eat will be digested and broken down and released as sugar into your blood, glucose. Even if you're eating a higher protein meal, that will be broken down, released as glucose in your blood. Your body responds by releasing a little bit of insulin. We get a natural drop off because insulin gets that sugar out of your blood into your cells for energy. And so then we naturally start to feel a little bit more hungry. What we want to try to avoid are these kind of big ups and downs of blood sugar. So if we were to have, let's say as an example, Cocoa Pops in a can of Monster for breakfast, it's not unheard in primary school children. I bet you see it, right? What you're going to have is very high, fast rise of blood sugar peaking up too much, too high. The body panics, doesn't want the blood sugar to be that high, and it dumps lots of insulin into the blood to try to get that sugar out. What happens is it overcompensates, blood sugar drops right down, and the body picks that up as a state of stress, starts releasing stress hormones. So when we're releasing more stress hormones, we're going to be more dysregulated, more emotionally dysregulated. It's going to increase our cravings for more sugar, for more carbohydrates. So you can see why that might prompt children to feel more hungry more quickly, to be more emotionally dysregulated. If you've had a coffee with a few sugars in and a piece of, I don't know, white toast and honey for breakfast, you're not getting foods there that are going to stop that blood sugar swing yourself. So you're more likely to feel a little bit more dysregulated and tired and imbalanced in your day as well. So symptoms of blood sugar imbalance include dizziness, tiredness, irritability, mood swings, crying spells, poor concentration, headaches, sugar, carb, caffeine cravings, difficulty sleeping, poor stress management, clumsiness, and after a few hours, actually that emotional dysregulation, just being a little bit more reactive. So we're coming back to trying to create meals that are going to support emotional regulation and behavior balance. In doing that, we're trying to support blood sugar balance. This again is important information that you can communicate to parents, but also helpful for yourself in your settings when you're preparing meals. That is why we want to be trying to get this nice balance of protein and carbohydrate, lots of vegetables, because they are packed with nutrients that are slow releasing. So we're not so likely to get these big peaks up and down. Yeah. So we want to be trying to include a little bit of protein with breakfast is a really good idea. It's the meal that often is deficient in breakfast, but it can help to support a little bit more regulation throughout the day. So protein comes from eggs, natural dairy, so things like milk, cheese, plain yogurt, unprocessed meat, fish, seafood, baked beans, lentils, tofu, chickpeas, buckwheat, quinoa, nuts and seeds. Obviously, most of you in your settings are unlikely to be including nuts, but they're there just so that you can communicate that information and understand that information. So we want to make up about 25% of every meal. And then when we're looking at carbohydrates, we want to be looking at more like these above, your whole grains, so your chickpeas, lentils, oats, whole grain pasta, buckwheat, potato with skins on, sweet potatoes, some brown rice, not just white, whole grain bread, not just white, vegetables, sweet corn, all vegetables are high in fibre, so that gives you nice slow releasing carbohydrates. Rather than cornflakes for breakfast, can we be looking at shredded wheat or Weetabix? It's going to be higher fibre, which is going to give more blood sugar stability, and those higher fibre foods do have more nutrition in them. They've got more B vitamins, they've got more folate, they've got more iron, they've got more magnesium and other really, really important minerals. Obviously, we don't want to overdo the fibre levels in younger babies that are starting to wean, because it can fill them up too quickly. However, we do still need to include some fibre in those babies' weaning diets as well. So we want to be looking at gradually moving to whole grain. If you have children that naturally that might be more used to white bread, maybe you start with 50-50. Maybe if you're baking, you can use 25% whole grain flour in baking, and thinking about reducing sugar as much as possible. This is one of the reasons that the early years nutrition guidelines have taken out desserts. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because desserts just kind of disappeared. No one said why. No one said where they were going. There wasn't really any mention of the fact that they disappeared or any kind of explanation of it, but they just kind of don't appear, do they? It's this second dish that we're now seeing in the early years guidelines. It doesn't mean you can't ever give desserts, and there are definitely some recipe guidelines that do have some desserts. It's about, not necessarily having a pudding every single day. And just around the whole grains, the guidance states provide whole grain starchy foods for at least one breakfast, at least one lunch, and at least one tea every single week. I would recommend you could do more than that, given that we know that 88% of preschoolers don't eat enough fibre. Might not need to be at every meal, but if you could add a little bit more in. And that's another reason to eat the whole fruit, because you've got all that fibre in, rather than fruit juice, for example, which is going to be more slow releasing. So natural ways to sweeten, if you do need to sweeten in a natural way, fruit, you know, if you're baking, bananas, berries, that kind of thing, you can add those to porridge. Honey, maple syrup, agave is still sugar. You could use a very small amount, but definitely no honey for under 12 months, particularly live honey, and they should be used very sparingly. Smoothies rather than juices. I get a lot of people say, oh, we shouldn't have smoothies. You shouldn't really have those smoothies that are kind of the shop bought ones that have got 6 or 7 portions of fruit, but there's no reason why you couldn't sometimes work with children to make, you know, smoothies with 1 piece of fruit and some yogurt and milk. That's perfectly healthy. You know, milk blended up with a piece of fruit. Maybe try making a green smoothie occasionally, throw a handful of spinach in there, call it a Hulk smoothie or a Shrek smoothie, works really nicely. Yeah, you can put oats, you can put some ground up seeds like ground flaxseed in there. Obviously, when you're using seeds in your settings, just bear in mind that often they will have a may contain warning on them, because they are made and often processed in factories that contain nuts. So if you have children that are nut allergic, you just need to be a little bit cautious with seeds particularly. But they are nut free, but they just might have a bit of they might have that may contain warning. Dried fruit and tinned fruit can be used, but just a little as part of a meal. Use dried fruit in baking, and you can sweeten with things like cinnamon. So cinnamon's lovely in porridge. It's a really nice way to kind of get that flavour in, get a sweet flavour in. You can use it in muffins, pancakes, that kind of thing as well. You might be looking at healthier desserts, things like baked apples and stewed fruit. Absolutely fine. The guidelines state that fruit and yogurt can absolutely be used. So baked apples and stewed fruit is a lovely dessert. Homemade crumbles can be used sometimes. You don't have to put sugar in them. You can use oats, not nuts, obviously, in settings, but you could give recipes home with nuts in, seeds in the topping, plain yogurt and fruit, of course, homemade muffins. You know, this is a carrot cake muffin here that I have developed, a smoothie with yogurt, you know, lots of ways to get those healthier ones in. Okay, I'm going to touch on healthy fats. We might finish it off next week. I'm aware that a lot of information being crammed into our probably tired brains after a busy day, but let's just start on healthy fats for a few moments, and then we will open up for some questions. So fats, many of you might find those 2 words together, healthy and fats, actually quite unusual, and not realize that fats can be healthy. Fats form a really important part of the Mediterranean diet, which is one of the healthiest diets on the planet. It's one of the most researched diets on the planet, and it is high in healthy fat, particularly extra virgin olive oil and olives, also things like oily fish and nuts and seeds. So those are healthy fats, the kind of less useful fats. And I use those words because I think it's quite nice to not be using the words good and bad when we talk about nutrition. And even healthy is such a loaded word these days, isn't it? Sometimes when I'm talking to families and children, I use the words useful, helpful around foods. So they really start to identify and associate nutrition with their bodies and their brains, rather than those kind of more loaded words, definitely not good or bad, because sometimes we just pick foods because they give us joy. So the less useful fats are more your vegetable oils, sunflower oil, even your saturated fats. It's not to say we should never eat saturated fats, but we don't want to be having too many saturated fats. Your trans and hydrogenated fats, which are in ultra processed foods, we want less of those, and we want more of the healthy fats, because our brains particularly need fat. The brain's over 60% fat. And every aspect of neurotransmission, so that's passing those chemical messengers in our brain, requires omega-3 fats, particularly. Of that 60% of fat in our brain, about 40 to 60% of that fat is DHA. DHA is a long chain omega-3 polyunsaturated fat. Lots of words to describe it. You might have heard it called omega-3, and it's the one that is excuse me, particularly associated with lower levels associated with reduced working memory, oppositional behaviour, emotional dysregulation. Low omega-3 is been shown in so much research to correlate to higher incidence of ADHD symptoms. It's not to say that low omega-3 causes ADHD, but it definitely exacerbates when there is an pre-existing genetic tendency towards it. Really, really important that we encourage our families to be eating enough healthy fat. It's important for our eyes, immunity, heart health, balancing inflammation, the brain, as we've talked about, insulation of our nerve cells. If you think about your kind of charging wires, that, you know, on your Apple kind of charging wires, the white bit around the outside, that insulates, doesn't it? So that means that that message can get through that charging wire. Same with our nerve cells. It has this insulation, these myelin sheaths around it, and what really helps to support those sheaths and the insulation of our nerve cells is fat. Really, really key. And every cell membrane in response to hormones and neurotransmitters requires fat. You know, even cholesterol is not necessarily the bad guy that we think it is. It's not to say that we shouldn't watch our cholesterol levels, but we do need healthy cholesterol. Actually, a balanced cholesterol is really important. We even need enough of it because it makes our steroid hormones, things like our sex hormones, our estrogen, our progesterone, testosterone, really important for the brain. And you might not have realized that there is quite a lot of research that points to low cholesterol predisposing young men to a higher risk of suicide. It's not something we hear about very much, but cholesterol, even cholesterol, is really important for our health. It's about getting that healthy balance of it. So fats are really, really important. Here are some of the signs of essential fat deficiency: dry skin, dry eyes, dry hair, dry hand, dandruff. Children with eczema often need more omega-3s. Low energy. In adults, high or low cholesterol can be linked to essential fat deficiency. Teenagers and above, premenstrual syndrome, aggression, irritability, hyperactivity, poor memory, learning difficulties, poor executive function, depression, anxiety, excess thirst. So you might see this in children. You tend to see it more in teenagers, but you can see it in young children. When you get that kind of red bumps all down the backs of the arms, it's not eczema. It's not open like eczema. It doesn't tend to be itchy. It's just lots of bumps on the backs of the arms. The Latin name for it, which I can't remember off the top of my head, actually translates as chicken skin. That's what it looks like. You know, when you've got raw chicken, that kind of really bumpy skin can be linked to essential fat deficiency. And you're going to see it if you've got particularly children that don't eat oily fish, nuts and seeds. How many children do you know that eat oily fish regularly, nuts and seeds regularly? Not many, right? And obviously vegans are not going to eat oily fish, vegetarians are not going to eat oily fish. So, you know, we're seeing a real problem. Most children do not get enough. Actually, the guidelines, the nutrition guidelines, I think it's one area that they don't go far enough, because they say to include oily fish at least once every 3 weeks, don't they? You know, bearing in mind that the majority of children in the UK don't eat oily fish regularly, I think that we should be trying to include for our fish eaters oily fish on a more regular basis. And I will give you some ideas on how to include them when we come back next time. So just to finish up on this slide here, so where do we get our omega-3s? So oily fish, a really nice way to remember that is smash. Salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardine, herring. Obviously be careful of smoked fish in younger children because it will be higher in salt. Be careful of bones. But you know, tin sardines, it's such a superfood. Watch the little bones. I would suggest you buy it either in olive oil or spring water, not in brine because of the salt, not in sunflower oil because that's high in omega-6, which we don't want so much of. Mash it up with a little bit of cream cheese, a really nice dip. Smoked mackerel works really well like that for older children. Fish pie is another really great option where you can include some oily fish. And for the plant-based eaters, and generally for all children, they can be including some plant-based omega-3, chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds. There is a little bit in things like almonds and walnuts. There's a little bit in dark green leafy veg like broccoli. There's a little bit in organic dairy, which a lot of families won't be buying organic dairy, but there is a little bit more omega-3 in organic dairy. There's a little bit in grass-fed meat, which a lot of your families won't be eating. But trying to help your families understand that these foods are really vital, and trying to see if you are providing food, whether this is something that you can bring into your menu. So ideally, we should be including oily fish twice a week. That's for children and adults. How many of you eat oily fish twice a week? Anyone? Probably not too many. Someone just stuck their tongue out and shook their head. I know it's one of those foods that we don't eat very often. You know, sardines though, I mean, if we're talking about families on the budget, they're so cheap. Such a great source of calcium, such a great source of protein, such a great source of omega-3. You know, you can get a can of sardines for under £1. You know, so they are a really, really good food. We'll finish up on omega-3s. We'll be covering 5 a day, why, how, and what can you do. Key nutrients for growing bodies and healthy brains. We'll go through lots of meal ideas and ways to boost the nutrient content in an easy and budget-friendly way. We'll be talking about how you can engage with families to encourage healthy eating and communicating with children and grown-ups. So that's in 2 weeks' time on the 26th of November at 6 o'clock. So let's open up for any questions. If you would like to find out more information from me, those are my contact details. You're very welcome to follow me on Instagram or have a look at my website. There's lots of websites, lots of recipes on my website. That carrot cake muffin is nut free. That is on my website. If you want to have a look for some recipes, you're very welcome to jump onto my website as well.